I found the chair pressed against the bedroom door when I woke up, even though I clearly remembered leaving it by the window the night before. For a few seconds, I just sat there on the edge of the bed, listening to my own breathing, trying to convince myself I had done it in my sleep. I hadn't. The room was still dark, the thin gray light of early morning barely slipping through the curtains. The air felt stale, heavier than it should have been, like the house had been holding something inside all night and hadn't decided yet whether to let it go. I stood up slowly, every small sound suddenly too loud in my ears. The chair scraped against the wooden floor when I moved it away from the door. That sound echoed down the hallway, sharp and hollow. I waited, holding my breath, listening for anything to answer it. Nothing did. Just the old house settling, or maybe the wind, or maybe nothing at all. I told myself there was a simple explanation. There always is if you're willing to accept it. I had rented the place because it was quiet, because I wanted a week without phones ringing or traffic outside my window, because I needed space after the kind of year that leaves you tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. A small, isolated house outside a dying logging town in northern Oregon seemed perfect. The listing had been vague in the way a lot of rural listings are. Secluded, peaceful, surrounded by forest. No mention of neighbors, no mention of how far the nearest store was, no mention of how the trees seemed to press in closer the moment you stepped off the gravel road. Still, the price was right, and I didn't need much more than a bed, a table, and a roof that didn't leak. The first day had been uneventful. I unpacked, checked the locks out of habit, and walked the short trail behind the house until it disappeared into thicker woods. I remember thinking how quiet it was, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that feels like a pause, like something waiting for its turn to speak. That night I slept badly. Not because of nightmares exactly, but because I kept waking up with the feeling that I had missed a sound. The way you sometimes wake up convinced someone said your name, even though the room is empty. Each time, I lay there and listened, counting my breaths until my heart stopped racing. Sometime after midnight, I heard it for the first time. It sounded like breathing, not my own, not the soft, familiar rhythm in my chest. This was slower, heavier, like someone standing just out of sight, trying very hard to stay quiet and failing. I sat up in bed, the blankets tangled around my legs, and listened. The sound stopped. For a long minute, there was nothing but the distant creak of the house and the wind moving through the trees. I almost laughed at myself, almost lay back down. Then it started again. 2 breaths this time, one after the other, close enough that I could tell it wasn't coming from outside. Close enough that my skin prickled with the certainty that whatever it was inside the house with me. I didn't move. I didn't even reach for my phone. I just sat there, staring into the dark, listening to someone, or something, breathe in my bedroom. When it finally stopped, I told myself I must have imagined it. Exhaustion does strange things. Old houses make noises. The mind fills in gaps when it's tired. I repeated those thoughts until they started to sound like facts. Morning came, eventually, and with it the thin comfort of daylight. That was when I found the chair against the door. I checked the rest of the house slowly, every step careful, every shadow suspicious. The place was small. A narrow hallway, a living room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen that smelled faintly of old wood and dust, and the bedroom at the end. Nothing was out of place. Nothing looked broken into. The windows were still locked. The front and back doors were still bolted the way I had left them. And yet the chair had been moved. I tried to shrug it off, but the feeling followed me all morning. Like the house was watching to see what I would do next. Around noon, I drove into town to get groceries. Town was generous. There were maybe a dozen buildings left standing, most of them boarded up or repurposed into something barely holding on. A gas station, a diner, a hardware store that looked older than the road it sat on. The woman at the diner counter asked if I was staying up the ridge. I nodded, and she paused for just a second too long before pouring my coffee. Not many people rent that place anymore, she said, casual in the way people are when they're trying not to sound like they're warning you. Why's that? I asked. She shrugged. Too quiet for most folks. Gets in your head. I laughed. because that's what you do when you don't want to sound nervous. She didn't laugh back. When I got back to the house, I noticed something else that hadn't been there before. The back door was unlocked. I stood there for a long moment, keys still in my hand, staring at the handle. I was sure I had locked it. I always locked it. It was a habit I'd picked up years ago and never managed to drop. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. My bag was where I'd left it. The food from town sat on the counter exactly where I put it. Still, I walked through every room again, checking corners, checking behind doors, checking the closet like I was in a bad horror movie and knew better than to skip it. Nothing. That evening, I tried to distract myself. I made dinner, turned on the radio, even laughed out loud at one point just to break the silence. It didn't help. The quiet just seemed to fold back in around the noise, thicker than before. When I went to bed, I left the light on in the hallway. Felt childish, but I didn't care. Sometime in the night, I woke up to the sound again. Breathing. It was closer this time. I didn't sit up. I didn't move at all. I just listened, every muscle locked, my mind racing through every terrible possibility. The sound was steady, patient, like whoever was making it knew I was awake and didn't mind waiting. Then, very slowly, I felt the mattress shift. Not much, just enough to tell me that the weight on the bed was not mine. The breathing was right behind me. I don't know how long I lay there, pretending to be asleep. Could have been seconds. Could have been minutes. Time does strange things when you're afraid to move. Finally, the pressure lifted. The mattress rose back to its normal shape. The breathing moved away. I waited until my chest started to hurt from holding my breath before I turned over. The room was empty. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, the chair was against the door again. This time, there were faint marks on the floor where it had been dragged. I left that afternoon. I didn't pack carefully. I didn't clean up. I just threw my things into the car and drove until the house was nothing but a shape in the mirror, swallowed by trees. For weeks after, I told myself it had been stress, lack of sleep, my imagination working against me in an unfamiliar place. Then, about a month later, I got a call from the rental company. They wanted to know if I had left someone behind. I asked what they meant. They said the cleaning crew found signs that someone else had been staying in the house with me. Not before me, not after. With me. They found an impression on the mattress, on the side I hadn't slept on. And in the dust under the bed, they found a trail of footprints that started at the bedroom door and ended right beside my pillow. The voicemail was already on my phone when I woke up, even though I hadn't had service for 2 days. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. The second was the message itself. It was my own voice. "Don't keep driving," it said, breathless and strained. "You already passed it. Turn around. You already passed it." I sat there in the cab of my truck, listening to it again, the early morning fog pressing against the windshield like damp cotton. The timestamp said it had been left at 3:12 a.m. I had been asleep in the back seat then, parked on the shoulder of a forest road that didn't even show up on my GPS. I was hauling antique furniture for a small restoration company, the kind of job that takes you through back roads and forgotten towns because the main highways don't always go where the customers are. The pay was decent, the schedule flexible, and most days were nothing but long stretches of silence broken by the radio and the hum of the engine. 2 days earlier, I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere in eastern Washington. The GPS recalculated, then lost signal entirely. No big deal. It happens sometimes. I kept driving, expecting to hit a town or at least a marked road within a few miles. Instead, the road narrowed. The trees closed in. The pavement cracked and faded into something that looked more like old, patched asphalt than a maintained highway. There were no signs, no mile markers, just a thin, winding strip of road cutting through dense forest. I told myself it was a service road, or an old logging route that hadn't been used in years. I'd driven worse. An hour later, I realized I hadn't seen another car the entire time. That was when I decided to turn around. There was nowhere to do it. The road was too narrow, the shoulders too soft. Every time I thought I saw a wider spot ahead, it curved away and disappeared into more trees. I kept going, telling myself I'd find a place to turn around any minute now. I didn't. By the time the sun started to set, the fog rolled in, thick and low, turning the world into a tunnel of gray and shadow. My headlights barely reached 10 feet in front of me. The radio crackled with static no matter what station I tried. That was when I saw the sign. It was old and leaning, half swallowed by brush on the side of the road. The paint was so faded I almost missed it, but as I passed, my headlights caught just enough of the lettering to read, "Dead End, 5 miles." I felt a wave of relief that didn't make any sense. A dead end meant a place to turn around. Clearing. A break in the trees. 5 miles wasn't far. I kept driving. 5 miles passed. Then 10. Then 15. The sign never came up again. The road didn't change. The trees didn't thin. The fog didn't lift. It was like I was driving in a loop that only pretended to move forward. Sometime after midnight, my fuel gauge dipped low enough to make my stomach tighten. That was when I finally did what I should have done hours earlier. I pulled over, shut off the engine, and tried my phone again. No signal. I climbed into the back seat and tried to sleep. That was when the dreams started. I kept dreaming I was driving, but the road was different. Wider, straighter, and there were signs this time. Dozens of them, all pointing in different directions. All with the same word on them. Turn back. Every time I tried to slow down, the truck wouldn't respond. The road stretched out in front of me, and the signs blurred together until they were just white streaks in the dark. I woke up with my heart pounding and my mouth dry, and with a voicemail on my phone. My voice, telling me not to keep driving. I got out of the truck and stood there for a long minute, the fog cold and damp against my face. The forest was silent in a way that felt deliberate, like it was holding its breath. I tried the engine. It started without a problem. I don't know why I didn't turn around right then. Maybe because I was afraid of what I'd find if I did. I drove forward. 10 minutes later, I saw something on the road ahead. At first, I thought it was a fallen tree or a pile of debris. Then my headlights caught the shape of it, and I realized it was a car. It was parked sideways across the road, blocking it completely. I slowed to a stop a few yards away. The car was old, maybe from the early 2000s, its paint dull and streaked with rust. The driver's door was open. The inside light was on. There was no one around. I got out, every step echoing too loudly in the quiet. The fog swallowed the edges of my headlights, turning the world into a small, dim circle around me. Inside the car, I found a phone on the driver's seat. The screen was cracked, but it was still on. It was open to the voicemail app. There was one message. I don't know what I expected to hear when I pressed play. What I got was my own voice. "You already passed it," it said. "You're going to keep driving anyway." I did too. My hands were shaking when I put the phone down. I looked around again, half expecting someone to step out of the fog and explain all of this. No one did. That was when I noticed the tracks. Not tire tracks, footprints. They started at the open driver's door and led off the road, straight into the trees. I followed them for maybe 20 feet before they disappeared into the undergrowth. I didn't go any farther. I went back to my truck, turned it around as best I could in the narrow space, and started driving the way I had come. The road looked exactly the same. Every curve, every tree, every shadow. After half an hour, I realized something was wrong. I should have seen the sign again. The dead END sign. I didn't. I drove for another hour. Nothing changed. The fuel gauge dropped lower. That was when my phone buzzed. Another voicemail. This one was new. It was my voice again, but it sounded older. Tired. Like I hadn't slept in days. "You turned around," it said. That didn't help. It never helps. The road doesn't care which way you're facing. I pulled over and shut off the engine, my hands clenched around the steering wheel. "What do you want from me?" I asked the empty cab. The fog pressed closer to the windows. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a voicemail. It was a text. From unknown. "You already know how this ends." I don't remember deciding to get out of the truck. I just remember standing on the road, looking down both directions, and realizing they were identical. Perfectly. Identical. That was when I heard the engine behind me. Headlights cut through the fog, growing brighter. A truck, just like mine, rolled to a stop a few yards away. The door opened, and I saw myself step out. He looked exhausted, thinner, like he'd been living on bad sleep and worse decisions. He looked at me and said, "Don't keep driving." Then he walked past me, got into my truck, and drove away. I stood there, alone, listening to the engine fade into the fog. My phone buzzed in my hand. A new voicemail, left just now, from my number. The first thing the search team found was my truck, still running, parked crooked at the edge of the fire road. The second was my radio, lying in the dirt a few yards away, its speaker hissing with quiet, steady static. They didn't find me, at least not right away. I was working a temporary contract as a night operator for a remote forestry service, the kind of job that exists mostly to make insurance companies feel better. The station was an old lookout outpost, half tower, half shack, perched on a ridge where the trees dropped away into miles of black forest. No cell service, no nearby towns, just a generator, a radio console, and a logbook no one had written in for weeks before I arrived. My job was simple. Stay awake, monitor the emergency channels, and relay anything unusual to the regional office. Most nights, unusual meant a drunk hiker who couldn't read a map or a rancher whose fence had caught fire. I wasn't expecting anything more dramatic than that. The first night was quiet enough to make me restless. The wind rattled the windows. The generator hummed. The radio stayed silent except for the occasional burst of static. Around 2 a.m., I made coffee that tasted like burnt metal and flipped through the old logbook just to have something to do. That was when I noticed the missing pages. Not torn out, not damaged, just skipped. The entries went from late October to mid-January with nothing in between, even though the dates at the top of the pages kept going. Someone had been there. They just hadn't written anything down. I told myself it didn't matter. Around 3:17 a.m., the radio clicked. Not the usual static. A clean, sharp sound, like someone pressing a button. "Station 12, a man's voice said. "Do you copy?" I sat up straight and reached for the mic. "Station 12. I copy. Go ahead." There was a pause. Then, "Good. You're still there." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. "Who is this?" I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, like he was trying not to be overheard. "You shouldn't be alone up there." I glanced at the dark window, at my own reflection staring back at me. "If you've got something to report, go ahead and report it," I said, trying to keep my voice professional. Static. Then, "I already did. You just haven't heard it yet." The line went dead. I waited for a follow-up that never came. After a few minutes, I wrote it down in the logbook, even though I wasn't sure what to call it. Unidentified caller. No incident reported. The rest of the night passed without another word. The second night, the call came earlier. 2:41 a.m. The same click. The same voice. "You moved the chair," he said. I felt a chill run up my arms. "What chair?" "The one by the window," he replied. "You pushed it back. That was a mistake." I stood up slowly, eyes scanning the small room. There was a chair by the window. I was sure it hadn't been there when I'd sat down. "Who is this?" I asked again. "You'll figure it out," he said. "You always do, just not in time." The radio went silent. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I drove down to the regional office and told them about the calls. The supervisor listened, nodded, and said it was probably someone messing with the frequency. Hunters, maybe, or another station bleeding through. "What about the missing log pages?" I asked. He frowned at that. "There shouldn't be any missing pages." He pulled up the digital records. I went back up the ridge with a knot in my stomach I couldn't untie. That night, the radio didn't wait for me. As soon as the generator kicked on, the speaker crackled to life. "You shouldn't have told them," the voice said. "Now they'll come looking, and they won't like what they find." My hands were shaking when I picked up the mic. "Looking for what?" For you, he said. Or what's left. I looked at the door, at the dark beyond it. Where are you? A soft, almost tired laugh came through the speaker. Closer than you think. Farther than you can get. The channel filled with static, then cleared again. You're standing where I stood, he said. That's the problem. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was staring at the console like it might answer questions I didn't know how to ask. What happened to you? I said. The pause this time was so long I thought the signal had dropped. Then, I stopped leaving. The rest of the night, the radio stayed quiet. Too quiet. I kept expecting it to come back on, to hear that voice again. But it didn't. Around 4:30 a.m. I heard something outside. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. On the wooden steps leading up to the station. I stood up, my heart hammering, and listened. The steps creaked under the weight of someone who knew exactly where to put their feet. I went to the door and looked through the small window. There was no one there, but the steps were still moving. Coming closer. The radio clicked. Don't open it, the voice said. That's how I got stuck. The handle turned. I don't know what I expected to see. What I saw was nothing. Just the empty platform, the railing, and the dark forest beyond. The footsteps stopped. You're not alone anymore, the voice said softly. You just don't know where the other one is yet. The channel went dead. I don't remember getting into my truck. I just remember driving. Driving until the road stopped making sense and the trees started to blur together and the sky began to lighten in a way that felt wrong. They found my truck 3 days later. They found the radio in the dirt. They found the station empty, the logbook open to a page that hadn't been there before. The last entry was in my handwriting. It said, "He says he's still here. I think I know what he means." And under it, in a different, shakier script, someone had written, "So are you." They told me the room was empty when the police arrived. That was the problem. The front desk camera showed me carrying my bags inside at 9:12 p.m. The hallway camera showed me walking to room 17. The elevator camera showed me coming back down alone at 3:46 a.m. Pale, shaking, and leaving the key card on the counter before walking straight out the front door. What none of the cameras showed was anyone else. And yet, when I got to the hospital, I kept telling them there had been someone in the room with me. I had been driving all day, crossing state lines in the kind of rain that turns headlights into blurry halos and makes every mile feel longer than the last. The motel was the first sign of civilization I'd seen in over an hour. A low, L-shaped building with a flickering neon sign that buzzed like an angry insect. Vacancy. Inside, the air smelled like old carpet and cleaning chemicals. The man at the desk barely looked up when I walked in. He slid a form toward me, asked for my license, and handed me a key card. Room 17, he said. End of the hall. I asked if there were many guests. He hesitated just for a second. Not tonight. That should have been my first warning. The hallway lights were dim, spaced too far apart, leaving long stretches of shadow between them. My footsteps sounded too loud. Every door I passed was closed, their little do not disturb signs hanging like stiff paper tongues. Room 17 was at the very end, next to a vending machine that hummed and rattled like it was struggling to stay alive. The door opened without a problem. The room looked normal enough. 2 beds, a small table, a TV bolted to the dresser. The curtains were half open, showing nothing but darkness and the faint reflection of the room itself. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the kind of exhaustion that makes your bones ache. That was when I noticed the bathroom light was on. I was sure I hadn't turned it on. I stood there for a moment, listening. The room was quiet. No water running. No fan. Just the low hum of the vending machine through the wall. I told myself the cleaning staff must have left it on. I went in and turned it off. When I came back out, the TV was on. Not loud. Just a low, steady murmur, like someone had left it playing for background noise. I stared at it, my hand still on the bathroom door. I knew I hadn't touched the remote. I turned it off and stood there, suddenly wide awake. I checked the room, the closet, under the beds, the bathroom again. Nothing. No one. I locked the door, slid the chain across for good measure, and sat back down on the bed. Get a grip, I said out loud, just to hear a human voice. I ate a granola bar from my bag, scrolled through my phone, and eventually lay down, fully clothed, planning to sleep for a few hours and get back on the road before dawn. Sometime later, I woke up to the sound of the shower. Not the pipes knocking, not water dripping, the shower, running. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to it. The sound was steady, normal, unmistakable. The chain on the door hadn't moved. I would have heard it. I sat up slowly and looked toward the bathroom. Light spilled out from under the door. My heart started to pound. "Hello," I called. The water kept running. I got up, every step careful, and stood in front of the bathroom door. I listened. I could hear the spray hitting the tile. I could hear breathing. Not loud, not panicked, just someone standing under the water. I reached for the handle and stopped myself. I don't know why. Something about the situation felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Like opening that door would be agreeing to something I didn't understand. "Front desk," I said, feeling stupid as soon as the word left my mouth. The breathing stopped. The water kept running. Then, very slowly, I heard footsteps inside the bathroom. Wet, bare, coming toward the door. I stepped back. The handle turned. The door opened a few inches, and then it stopped like something on the other side was holding it there. I could see a sliver of the bathroom. Steam. The edge of the mirror. The shower curtain, still moving slightly from the water. I couldn't see anyone. "I think you're in my room," I said, my voice coming out thin and unsteady. For a second, nothing happened. Then I heard a voice, right on the other side of the door. "You checked in late," it said. Sounded like a man, but not quite right. Like he was copying the way people talk instead of actually doing it. "I paid for this room," I said. "So did I," the voice replied. The door pushed a little harder against whatever was stopping it. I backed away until I hit the bed. "This room doesn't empty," the voice said. "It just changes hands." The bathroom light flickered. The door closed. The shower shut off. The room went silent. I stood there for a long time, not sure what to do. Finally, I grabbed my bag, unlocked the door, and left. I didn't look back. At the front desk, the man was still there. "There was someone in my room," I said. 17. Someone was already in there. He looked at me the way people do when they're trying to decide how much effort to put into not believing you. "That room hasn't been occupied in weeks," he said. "Then explain the shower," I said. "Explain the voice." He sighed, typed something into his computer, and turned the screen toward me. "Room 17, vacant." "For what it's worth," he said quietly. "You're not the first person to say that." I left the key card on the counter and walked out. The next morning, a state trooper found me sitting in my car on the side of the highway, shaking and not remembering how I got there. When they checked the motel, room 17 was empty. The bathroom was dry. The beds were untouched. The only thing out of place was a single, damp footprint on the tile, right in front of the bathroom door. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't there when they went back an hour later. The receipt said I paid at 2:03 a.m. The security footage said I never went inside. Both of those things couldn't be true, but they were. I was driving across southern Nevada, cutting through a stretch of desert that looked the same for hours no matter which direction you went. The kind of road where the radio fades in and out and the horizon never seems to get any closer. I'd misjudged my fuel, and by the time the low fuel light came on, I was already farther from the last town than I was comfortable admitting. That's when I saw the lights. They sat low and lonely against the dark, a small island of yellow and white in the black desert. A gas station, or what passed for one. 2 pumps, a squat building, and a flickering sign that said open in letters that buzzed like they were fighting to stay lit. I pulled in, more relieved than I wanted to admit. The place looked wrong in small, hard-to-explain ways. Too clean for something this far out. Too quiet even for the desert. The wind didn't seem to touch it. The darkness around the lights felt thicker, like the station was sitting in a shallow bowl cut out of the night. I shut off the engine and listened for a second. Nothing. No insects. No distant traffic. Not even the soft ticking of my cooling engine seemed loud enough. I got out and walked to the nearest pump. The screen glowed to life as soon as I picked up the nozzle. Insert card. I did. The pump whirred, then started counting. While it filled, I glanced toward the building. The windows were lit, but I couldn't see anyone inside. Just shelves and a counter and a coffee machine that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. The pump clicked off. I put the nozzle back and stood there, staring at the number on the screen. It was higher than I expected. Not outrageous, but enough to make me want to go inside and get a receipt, if only to prove to myself I hadn't imagined the whole stop. The door chimed when I opened it. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee. The shelves were half-stocked with things that looked slightly out of date. Candy bars with packaging I hadn't seen in years. Chips in flavors I thought had been discontinued. "Hello," I called. No answer. I walked up to the counter. There was a small bell, the kind you ring for service. I tapped it once. The sound echoed a little too much in the empty room. From somewhere behind the counter, I heard movement. A door opened. Footsteps. Then a man stepped out from a back room. He was tall and thin, wearing a faded uniform that might once have been blue. His hair was gray. His face lined in a way that suggested he'd been tired for a long time. "Evening," he said. "Morning, technically," I replied, forcing a small smile. "I just filled up. Pump 2. He nodded and typed something into the register. The screen glowed, reflected in his eyes. "You're not from around here," he said. "No," I said. "Just passing through." "Most people are," he said, like it was a joke he'd told too many times. The register beeped, and he tore off a receipt and slid it across the counter. I glanced at it. The time said 2:03 a.m. That was right. The location line, though, was blank. No address, no city, just the name of the station, printed in a font so faded it was hard to read. I looked up to ask him about it. He was already walking back toward the back room. "Hey," I said, "your receipt doesn't have." The door closed behind him. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to follow. Something about the way he'd left felt final, like the conversation was over whether I agreed or not. I didn't follow him. I bought a bottle of water from the cooler, left a few bills on the counter, and walked back outside. The desert was still silent. I got in my car and started the engine. The clock on the dashboard read 2:17 a.m. As I pulled back onto the road, I checked my mirrors. The gas station was already gone. Not fading into the distance. Gone. Just empty desert behind me, stretching out under the stars. I told myself I'd missed the turn, or that the lights had been farther back than I realized. The mind does strange things when you're tired. I drove for another hour before I noticed something else. The fuel gauge hadn't moved. It was still exactly where it had been when I left the station. Full. I slowed down, staring at it. The needle didn't budge. I reached out and tapped the glass. Nothing. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A notification from my bank. A charge. 2:03 a.m. Gas purchase. Location unavailable. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I kept driving. At 3:11 a.m. I saw the lights again. Same station. Same sign. Open. I eased off the gas and pulled in, my heart beating a little faster this time. Everything was exactly the same. Same pumps. Same building. Same flickering sign. I sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. When I opened the door, the desert was silent again. I walked inside. The bell chimed. The shelves were the same. The counter was the same. The coffee machine hummed softly. The man stepped out from the back room. "Evening," he said. "Morning," I replied. "I was just here." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Most people are." "You gave me a receipt," I said. "You said I wasn't from around here." He paused just a fraction of a second. "That sounds like something I'd say." "What is this place?" I asked. "A station," he said. "We don't close." That's not what I mean. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was deciding how honest to be. People stop when they're running low, he said finally. That's how it works. And then? I asked. And then they leave, he said. Do they? I asked. He didn't answer. I looked past him toward the back room. The door was open a crack. For just a second, I thought I saw something moving in there. Not a person. Not exactly. More like a shadow that didn't belong to anything. I don't want to stop here again, I said. His expression softened. Just a little. Then don't, he said. But if you do, we'll be open. I walked out without buying anything this time. When I got back on the road, I drove faster than I should have. An hour passed. Then another. At 4:22 a.m., my low-fuel light came on. I stared at it, my mind racing. The gauge dropped. Slowly but steadily. I checked my phone. No service. The desert stretched out in front of me, empty and dark. And in the distance, far ahead, I saw the faint glow of lights. I don't know how many times I stopped at that station. I know my bank account has more charges than I can explain. I know my receipts don't list a location. And I know that sometimes, late at night when I'm driving and the road feels too long and too empty, I see that same flickering sign in my mirrors. Still open. Waiting. They found my notebook at the base of the tower. They said there was no record of any tower ever being there. That's what makes this difficult to explain. I was working seasonal contracts for a survey company, the kind that sends you to places no one cares about until someone decides they might need to build something there. My job was simple. Drive out, take measurements, mark coordinates, and move on. Most of the time it was just me, my truck, and a lot of empty land. The assignment that led me there was supposed to take 3 days. A patch of state forest in northern Idaho. Far enough from anything that my phone lost service 10 minutes after I left the highway. The map showed old logging roads and not much else. No structures, no active sites, just trees and elevation lines. I set up a small camp near one of the dirt roads and spent the first day walking transects, placing markers, and writing numbers that all started to blur together by late afternoon. It was quiet in that deep, heavy way forests get when there's no wind. Even the birds seemed to keep their distance. That night I slept in the truck. Sometime before dawn, I woke up to a light. Not the pale gray of morning. Not my headlights. This was a thin, white beam cutting through the trees, steady and deliberate, like someone had aimed a spotlight straight into the forest. I sat up and watched it move. It wasn't sweeping randomly. It traced slow, careful arcs, pausing now and then like whoever was holding it was looking for something specific. For a moment I thought it might be another survey crew or maybe a ranger. But the beam was too high, too far off the ground. And it was coming from deeper in the woods than any road I knew about. The light disappeared behind the trees. I told myself I'd check it out in the morning. In daylight, the forest looked normal again. No sign of the light. No sign of any trail that hadn't been on my map. I almost convinced myself I dreamed it. Then I found the footprints. They weren't fresh exactly. The edges were a little soft, like they'd been there for a while. But they were clear enough to follow, leading off the dirt road and into a patch of thicker trees. They weren't boot prints. They were too narrow, too evenly spaced, like someone had been walking very carefully, placing each foot in exactly the same way. I followed them. The forest changed as I went. The ground sloped upward, the trees growing closer together, their branches knitting into a canopy that turned the sunlight into a dim, green haze. The air felt cooler, quieter. After maybe 20 minutes, I saw it. The tower. It rose out of a small clearing like a thin, gray needle, all metal and straight lines, completely out of place among the trees. It wasn't huge, but it was tall enough that its top disappeared into the canopy. There were no markings, no signs, no fence, just a narrow door at the base and a ladder running up the side into the shadows above. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. It wasn't on my map. I checked the coordinates on my GPS. According to it, I was standing in the middle of nothing. I walked around the base, looking for any indication of what it was for. A fire lookout, maybe? But it didn't have the right shape. No platform. No windows, just a sealed structure and a ladder that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Except for the footprints. They led right up to the door. I should have left then. Instead, I tried the handle. It opened. Inside, the tower was even stranger. The interior was narrow, just wide enough for one person to climb the ladder that ran straight up the center. The walls were bare metal, cold to the touch, with no wires, no equipment, nothing that explained why it existed. There was a faint smell in the air. Not rust, not mold. Something more like old dust and cold stone. I climbed. The ladder seemed to go on longer than it should have. My arms started to burn, and my legs ached, but every time I looked up, the top was still out of sight. About halfway up, I noticed something carved into the metal wall. A line of text, scratched in deep enough that it had to have taken time. If you hear it, don't answer. I stared at it, my heart beating a little faster. Hear what? I muttered. The tower answered with silence. I kept climbing. When I finally reached the top, I found myself in a small, circular room. No windows, no equipment, just a single chair bolted to the floor in the center, and a narrow slit in the ceiling where a shaft of pale light fell straight down. On the wall opposite the ladder, there were more words. Not carved, written, in different handwritings, different sizes, some neat, some barely legible. It starts as a sound. Don't turn around. It knows your voice. We should have left it alone. I backed toward the ladder, suddenly very aware of how far down it was. That was when I heard it. At first, it was just a hum. Low, almost below the range of hearing. The kind of sound you feel more than you hear, like a distant engine or a power line in the wind. Then it changed. It became patterned. Not words, not music, but something with a rhythm that made my skin crawl, like it was trying to become one or the other and failing. The light from the slit in the ceiling flickered. The hum grew louder. I grabbed the ladder and started down. Halfway down, the sound followed me. It wasn't coming from above. It wasn't coming from below. It was coming from inside the walls. And then, layered over it, I heard something else. My name. Not shouted. Not whispered. Spoken normally. Calmly. The way someone says your name when they're standing right behind you. I froze. Don't answer, I told myself. Don't turn around. My name came again. Closer. I started climbing faster. The ladder seemed longer on the way down. The metal walls felt tighter, like the tower was narrowing around me. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and with it came more voices. Not just mine. Others. Men. Women. Some young. Some old. All speaking in that same calm, almost kind tone. It felt like being surrounded by people you couldn't see. I didn't look back. I didn't answer. I climbed until my hands were raw and my arms were shaking. When I finally dropped out of the door at the base, I fell to my knees on the forest floor and just breathed. The tower was silent. The forest was silent. I got up and walked away without looking back. Back at camp, I packed up everything and left. I drove straight to the nearest town and told the ranger station what I'd found. They looked at my map. They looked at my coordinates. They shook their heads. There's nothing out there, one of them said. No towers, no structures, just forest. I showed them my notebook, the pages where I'd sketched the tower, the words I'd copied from the walls, the warning carved into the metal. They exchanged a look I couldn't read. A week later, I went back with two of them to show them. We followed the same road, the same turn, the same patch of trees. The clearing was gone. No tower, no ladder, no door, just trees and undergrowth, like nothing had ever been there. They told me I must have gotten turned around. They told me I must have been tired. They told me there was no record of any structure in that area, and never had been. They did find my notebook, though. It was lying on the ground where the base of the tower should have been, open to a page I didn't remember writing. In my handwriting, it said, "It's easier when you answer. I don't go into remote areas anymore. And sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear that low, distant hum start up again. And I have to fight the urge to listen for my name." The journal was already half full when the police gave it back to me. They said they found it on my kitchen table, open to a page that described a phone call I hadn't made yet. That was the first time I realized the problem wasn't that I was forgetting things. It was that something was remembering them for me. I live alone in a small house outside a river town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place people move to when they want fewer neighbors and more quiet. I work from home, mostly editing technical manuals and instruction guides for companies that don't want to pay full-time staff. It's not exciting, but it pays the bills, and it keeps my days predictable. Predictable is important when you start noticing gaps. The first one was small. I woke up one morning and found muddy footprints by the back door. They led into the kitchen and stopped in front of the sink. I assumed they were mine, even though I couldn't remember going outside the night before. I cleaned them up and didn't think much more about it. The second was harder to ignore. I found a notebook on my desk that I didn't remember buying. It was plain. Black cover. No label. No name inside. When I opened it, I saw my handwriting on the first page. If you're reading this, something already went wrong. I laughed, a little nervously, and flipped the page. There were entries, dates, times, short, clipped notes about my day. 9:15 a.m. Didn't answer the door. Good. 12:40 p.m. The phone rang. Don't trust it. 3:02 p.m. You're losing time again. Check the stove. I checked the date on the last entry. It was today. I sat there for a long time turning pages. The entries went back about 2 weeks. Some were boring. Grocery lists, work reminders. Others made no sense. He stood in the hallway again. Don't look at him. The mirror is late. That's worse than early. You wrote this so you'd believe yourself. I told myself it was stress. Sleepwalking. Some kind of dissociative episode I'd read about but never thought applied to me. Then the phone rang. I stared at it until it stopped. A few minutes later, I turned back to the journal. A new line had been added at the bottom of the page. 4:11 p.m. You didn't answer. Good. My stomach tightened. I checked the time. 4:12 p.m. I didn't touch the journal after that. I closed it and put it in a drawer, like that might stop whatever was happening. Didn't. Over the next few days, I started noticing other things. The back door unlocked when I was sure I'd locked it. The TV on in the living room when I hadn't been in there. The shower warm like someone had just used it. And every time when I checked the journal, there was an entry. Always in my handwriting. Always a little ahead of me. You're going to hear someone in the hallway tonight. Don't call out. That's how it learns your voice. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps. Slow. Careful, stopping just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath. The handle didn't move. The footsteps eventually went away. In the morning, the journal was open on my desk. Good. You listened. I started taking the journal with me to work, to the grocery store, anywhere I went. I wanted to see if it would still change when I wasn't home. It did. I'd open it in my car and find new entries written while I was gone. You left the house at 10:03. That was a mistake. It was inside while you were out. That was when I called the police. They came, walked through the house, found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No signs of anyone else living there. They did notice the journal. One of them flipped through it, frowning. Did you write all this? He asked. I don't remember writing any of it, I said. He looked at me like he was trying to decide how honest I was being. It's your handwriting. I know, I said. That's the problem. They left after suggesting I talk to a doctor. That night, the journal warned me about the call. It will pretend to be someone you know. It will sound right. Don't answer. The phone rang at 9:37 p.m. The caller ID showed my sister's name. She lives 3 states away. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The journal lay open on the table. Don't. I didn't answer. The voicemail came a minute later. I didn't listen to it. Couldn't. The next morning, the journal was open to a new page. You shouldn't have let it record your voice. My hands were shaking when I picked up my phone and deleted the voicemail without playing it. That was the day I noticed the mirror. It was in the hallway bathroom, the one I rarely used. When I walked past it, I caught a glimpse of myself in the corner of my eye. Except the reflection didn't move when I did. I stopped. The reflection stopped a second later. We stood there, staring at each other. Then it smiled. I backed away slowly and went to get the journal. My reflection was normal when I came back. The journal was open to a page I hadn't seen before. It's getting better at timing. That was the last straw. I packed a bag and went to stay at a motel on the edge of town. I left the journal on the kitchen table and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls. From my own number. When I got back to the house with the police, the journal was still on the table. Open. The last entry was written in my handwriting, but the letters were shaky, uneven, like whoever wrote them had been in a hurry. It doesn't need me anymore. That was when they found me in the living room, or what was left that looked like me. They told me later there were no signs of a struggle. No forced entry. No explanation that made sense. They also told me the journal was half full when they gave it back to me. Open to a page that described a phone call I hadn't made yet. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I can hear someone in the hallway. And sometimes, when I check the journal, I find new entries written in a hand that looks almost like mine. Just a little more confident. The first thing they asked me was how long I'd been missing. The second was why my car was found 200 miles away, parked neatly in front of my own house. I didn't have an answer for either. I came to sitting on a bench at a bus stop I didn't recognize, in a town I was sure I'd never been to before. My head hurt in a dull, distant way, like I'd slept wrong for a week straight. My phone was in my pocket. My wallet was where it should have been. Everything about me looked normal except for the part where I had no idea how I got there. The sign behind the bench said the next bus would arrive in 40 minutes. I checked my phone for signal. I had it. Full bars. There were 3 missed calls. All from my brother. And 1 text, sent 2 days earlier. Where did you go? I stared at it, trying to remember leaving. The last clear memory I had was packing my car for a short trip. Nothing special. Just a few days away to clear my head. Maybe see some old places I hadn't visited in years. I remembered locking my front door. I remembered putting the bag in the trunk. I didn't remember driving. I called my brother back. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight with something that sounded like relief and anger mixed together. Where are you? He asked. At a bus stop, I said. I think. Somewhere. What do you mean, where did I go? There was a long pause. You didn't show up, he said. You didn't answer your phone. We thought you'd just gone off-grid for a bit. But then your neighbor called and said your car was back. In your driveway. Like you'd never left. My stomach dropped. That's not possible. It's there, he said. I'm standing next to it. I told him where I was. He said he'd come get me. While I waited, I looked around the town. It was small. Too small to have a bus stop that clean. A few brick buildings. A diner. A hardware store. Everything looked slightly faded, like an old photograph left in the sun. There were people around, but not many, and they moved with the slow, unhurried confidence of people who had nowhere else to be. A woman sat down on the bench beside me. First time here? She asked. I think so, I said. She smiled, but there was something tired in it. That's what everyone says. What is this place? I asked. A stop, she said. For some of us, anyway. On the way to where? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she nodded toward the road. You leaving soon? My brother's coming to get me, I said. Her smile faded a little. That's good. You should go when you get the chance. When wouldn't I? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. People get comfortable, she said. Or confused. Sometimes both. Before I could ask what she meant, she stood up and walked away, disappearing into the diner. My brother arrived an hour later. He hugged me harder than I expected, then pulled back and looked me over like he was checking to make sure I was real. You scared us, he said. I scared myself, I replied. The drive home was quiet. I watched the road, waiting for something to spark a memory. Nothing did. When we pulled into my driveway, my car was exactly where he said it was. Parked straight, locked, no signs of damage. No extra miles on the odometer that made sense. Inside, my house looked untouched. My bag was gone, though. "So where were you?" my brother asked. "I don't know," I said. "I don't remember leaving." He frowned. "You called me 3 days ago." "I did." "Yeah." "Said you'd made it." "Said the place was quiet." My heart started to race. "What place?" He shrugged. "You didn't say. Just said you were going to stay the night and head back in the morning." "Did I sound normal?" I asked. He hesitated. "You sounded tired. But you always do." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman at the bus stop. About the way she'd said people get comfortable. Or confused. Sometime after midnight, I got up and went to the kitchen for water. That was when I saw the note on the counter. It was written on one of my grocery lists in my handwriting. "You left. You just don't remember how." I stared at it, my mouth dry. On the back there was more. "Don't go back. It gets harder to leave every time." I searched the house for anything else out of place. In the spare room closet, behind a stack of old boxes, I found my bag. It was packed. Inside, there were things I didn't remember bringing. A folded map with a small town circled in red. A bus ticket stub with no date printed on it. And a receipt from a diner I didn't recognize. The name at the top made my stomach twist. Waypoint Diner. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next day, I looked up the town on the map. It wasn't there. Not on any map I could find. I drove around for hours trying to match roads, trying to find anything that looked familiar from the ride home with my brother. Nothing did. A week passed. Then 2. I started to almost convince myself it had been some kind of breakdown. Stress. Exhaustion. The mind filling in blanks with stories that felt real. Then my phone rang. The caller ID was blank. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. "You said you'd come back," a woman's voice said. "You always do." It was the same voice from the bus stop. I deleted the message. That night, I dreamed of a town that looked like a memory of a memory. Of a bench at a bus stop. Of people who sat and waited without ever checking the time. When I woke up, there was dirt on my shoes. Fresh. I stood in my bedroom, staring at them, my heart pounding. On my nightstand, there was a new note. In my handwriting. "You almost stayed." I don't know how many times I've been there. I only know that sometimes I wake up with the feeling that I just got back. And sometimes, when I'm driving and the road stretches out a little too empty in front of me, I see a familiar bus stop in the distance. And for a moment, I have to remind myself that I already left. Even if I don't remember how.